Chapter 249, Al-Karti, 1. Even in the early hours of the morning, the lights of the Lionheart's main estate weren't fully extinguished. The mansion, its gardens, the forest, and all the rest of the estate were guarded by knights. In addition to that, various spells protected the interior of the mansion, so breaking in from outside was close to impossible. Of course, the people inside the mansion could still move freely. Whether it was late at night or early in the morning, anyone belonging to the main family was allowed to venture anywhere on the grounds of the estate. Accompanied by Layman, Gerhard had gone to their estate in Jadal, while Cyan and Gilead had yet to return from Roer. The 3rd Division of the Black Lion Knights, which was commanded by Carmen, was conducting nighttime training in the depths of the forest. Since no exceptions were allowed during training, even Seal, who should currently be wrapped up in a blanket, was somewhere in the forest. Eugene had decided that today was the perfect time to leave the mansion. He had decided that he wouldn't be using the Lionheart's warp gate that stood within their forest and would instead use the warp gate of the capital city of Ceres. Eugene would be using the fake ID that he had used back in Samar on the way to Helmuth, and once entering Helmuth he would decide what to do next according to the situation. Eugene had even written a letter for the rest of the Lionhearts, hoping that it would keep them from getting too worried. However, he hadn't written down where exactly he was going and had just said that he would return after taking a look around the world. After thinking that it might not be enough, Eugene had then added on a few more lines. "I'm leaving in order to find myself. Please don't worry too much. I'll definitely return." Eugene had added these lines after some careful consideration. Although he didn't know how the others might react, he knew how Carmen would respond to that first line. If someone from the main family snapped and made a fuss about finding Eugene, Carmen would definitely stop them from looking for him. Eugene knew Carmen well enough to be sure of this. Eugene silently considered this fact. This definitely wasn't because they were the same type of people. While Eugene desperately tried to convince himself of this, he placed the carefully written letter on his desk. All of the items he had prepared for the trip were already inside the cloak of darkness, so everything that Eugene needed to take with him was on his body. After leaving his room while making his way down the hallway, Eugene ran into his elven maids, Nerissa and Lavera. "Sir Eugene, where are you going?" Nina, who was originally Eugene's personal maid, had become the chief maid in charge of the entire annex, so Lavera and Nerissa were currently serving as his personal maids together. While their careers as servants of the Lionheart clan weren't that long, the serving experience they had accumulated during their past lives as slaves, along with their sincerity and loyalty towards Eugene, worked as additional points in their favor. In other words, they were a special case. This couldn't be helped. While Eugene didn't really care about it, he had become the person with the strongest influence in the main family. Layman Schulhoff, who Eugene had brought back from Nahama, had joined the Knights of the White Lion and was currently serving as Gerhard's personal escort. It was all thanks to Eugene having gotten tired of Layman following him around shouting, my lord, I'll be fine, so just go and escort my father." Nerissa and Lavera had become his personal servants right out of their apprenticeships because Eugene, after seeing how enthusiastic these two were, had said something to Nina in passing. "Isn't it enough to graduate them from their apprenticeship if they've learned that much? It will be inconvenient for them to be used by anyone else, so just have them serve me." In the first place, Nina herself had become Eugene's personal attendant as soon as she had graduated from her apprenticeship, and she had risen to the rank of the Annex's Chamberlain in just a few years. Nina felt that she needed more of an education, but over the past 8 years she had learned to follow Eugene's orders unquestioningly. That was how Nerissa and Lavera became Eugene's personal attendants. Currently, the two of them were each walking while carrying a large basket of laundry. The contents of the basket were all Eugene's training clothes, towels, and innerwear. "A walk," Eugene brusquely answered their question. "If that's the case, allow me to wait on you," Nerissa quickly responded. At this, Lavera glanced at Nerissa with her lone eye and muttered, "Wouldn't it be difficult to match Sir Eugene's stride with your prosthetic leg?" "Even with my prosthetic I can still walk quickly, so it will be fine," Nerissa insisted. Thud thud. As a demonstration, Nerissa took a step up and down the stairs with her false leg. Eugene couldn't understand why these two were arguing like this when he hadn't even accepted their offer. Also, why would he need an attendant to serve him when he was just going for a walk? "I'm just going to go by myself. The laundry I left out for you earlier was the last of it, so don't go into my room while I'm gone," Eugene instructed. Nerissa nodded. Yes sir, understood. How would you like to eat your breakfast? Lavera asked. Eugene waved her off. I'll call you if I'm hungry, so don't knock on my door in the morning. This was because it would be better the later the letter was found. Leaving Nerissa and Lavera behind, Eugene headed out of the mansion. From then on he didn't run into anyone else. He had memorized the patrol routes of the knights charged with guarding the mansion. Even if they did cross paths, Eugene suppressed his presence so that he wouldn't be noticed, and he also used a spell to hide his appearance. Once he was far away from the mansion, Eugene no longer needed to be so careful with his movements. As he soared up into the night sky, Mare poked her head out from within the cloak. While looking at the Lionheart mansion that was getting farther away by the second, Mare grinned. The next time we return here it'll be with Lady Sienna, right? Mare asked. As long as things go well then probably, Eugene replied. Of course things will go well, Mare said confidently. Sir Eugene, if you were on your own, then I couldn't help but be anxious. But Lady Anise is going with you as well, right? On the contrary, wouldn't that actually make things more likely to go wrong? Eugene was sincerely worried about this possibility. If it were in the past, things might have been different. But currently, it had been revealed that Eugene was the hero and Anise was the saint. Looking at themselves from Hematha's point of view, they should be seen as intruders entering the country to someday attempt to slay the demon kings, so Eugene was worried about whether or not they would even be able to enter the country through normal means. For now he would try to enter with his fake ID, and if that didn't work he would have to see about smuggling himself in. Sir Eugene, instead of thinking up something stupid, why don't you just leave it up to Lady Christina? Mare suggested. Eugene repeated her words back to her. Something stupid? Me. You just thought about smuggling yourself in, didn't you, Sir Eugene? The Devildom of Helmuth isn't just some local hole-in-the-wall shop. So do you really think that it's possible for you to smuggle yourself in? Mare asked skeptically. Eugene snorted. You've never even been to Helmuth, so why are you acting like such a know-it-all? I've spent most of my life in Akron, and the only other places I've been to are the places that I've gone with you, Sir Eugene, so of course I haven't been to Helmuth. However, I do know that Helmuth is a country that's impossible to smuggle yourself into, Mare insisted. Do you really think I don't know that? Eugene tried to bluff. The fact that you're still thinking about smuggling yourself in despite knowing that proves that you're coming up with a stupid idea, Mare said. Delighted by her own clear reasoning, she puffed out her chest. Annoyed by her triumphant smile, Eugene flicked Mare right in the middle of her forehead. Ouchie! Mare yelped. Although she had suffered for it, Mare was right. It was impossible to smuggle anything into Helmuth. The Demon King's empire was governed by a completely different set of laws compared to those which governed the rest of the kingdoms on this continent. If one were a citizen of Helmuth, as long as one paid their regular monthly tax and life force, their livelihood was guaranteed without them having to work even a day for the rest of their life. The only consequence of paying the tax and life force was that one would have no energy for the rest of the day. Furthermore, if one signed a contract to become an undead worker after one died, one could even become a quasi-nobleman and live a luxurious life. In this empire where you could lounge around without having to work, the cost of immigrating into the empire was quite expensive, but it didn't seem like too much when one considered being able to live like that for the rest of their life. However, there weren't just one or two people in the world who wanted to enjoy comforts and luxuries without paying the price that they needed to pay. The sorts of people who were even unwilling to accept the offer to be put to work after they were dead would attempt to secretly cross the borders of Helmuth without any assistance from Helmuth's Immigration Support Service and without purchasing permanent residency. Such people would surely die. Helmuth was an empire entirely ruled by the Demon King, so it was unbelievably generous to humans, but it showed no mercy to smugglers or illegal residents. This was only natural. Night demons like the succubus could forcibly drain a person's life force through their dreams. But that said, night demons weren't the only ones who coveted a human's life force. Life force, a human's vitality, had the power to nourish demon folks. Helmuth's humans didn't have to work because they donated their life force to the demon folks of the aristocratic class and the demon kings who stood at the very top. Smugglers and illegal immigrants who attempted to receive the same preferential treatment while not providing regular payments of their life force were killed by hunting packs of demonic beasts without even giving them a chance to defend themselves in court. Of course, with your skills, you should be able to outwit the hunting packs of demonic beasts. However, what are you going to do after that? Sir Eugene, you will still be an illegal immigrant, and under Helmuth's laws, all illegal immigrants are executed unconditionally, Mare lectured as she clicked her tongue. Therefore, please don't think of anything strange and just trust in Lady Christina. After all, isn't Alcardi Parish, which we've planned to use as our route into Helmuth, the place where Lady Christina originally resided? Her reasoning was impossible to refute. As such, Eugene flicked Mare on the forehead once more. The Alcardi Parish in the Devildom of Helmuth was where the borders of Uras and Helmuth met. Originally, Christina had served as the assistant bishop of the Alcardi Parish, where she had been in charge of spreading the faith and enlightening the immigrants of Helmuth and the occasional freak demon folk. As a place that lay on the border with Uras, it was possible to enter Helmuth through the Alcardi Parish. They would still have to go through immigration, but Christina should be able to make things more convenient by relying on old connections. The world really has changed a lot, Eugene sighed. The Bishop of Alcardi. Eugene frowned as he thought of what to expect from that person. Although he could use his fake ID when leaving Kiel, Eugene couldn't use it to secretly enter Uras, as it was sure to be discovered. The Vatican had been the ones to issue his fake ID, and the immigration inspector was a bishop who belonged to the Vatican. Since he was fully aware that his fraudulent use of the fake ID card would be discovered, Eugene took a stand close to the inspection checkpoint. Upon noticing the forgery, the bishop called out to him, "Excuse me." The fake ID was discovered, but ultimately there weren't any issues. When he was dragged into the interrogation room to be questioned about the ID, Eugene subtly released the spell that had been concealing his original appearance, handed them an identity card with the name Eugene Lionheart on it, and showed them the Holy Sword. That was all that Eugene needed to do to solve any problems he might face within the Holy Empire. He proceeded to make use of a few more warp gates. The place where he had arranged to meet with Christina was Naren, a city at the northern end of Uras. Once they departed from there, they would need to cross several days' worth of planes to arrive at the Alcardi Parish. "It has been a while," Christina said in greeting. She had already arrived in Naren the day before and had been waiting for Eugene. Thanks to that, Eugene immediately reunited with Christina upon arriving through Naren's warp gate. "It hasn't really been that long," Eugene argued. It had been about a month and a half since they had parted ways at Fort Lehane. It had already been 4 days since Eugene had secretly left the Lionheart estate in the middle of the night. Eugene complained, "Although this is only my second time visiting this country, I've really come to dislike it. The warp gates are so sparsely distributed between the cities that moving around is so cumbersome and time-consuming." Christina interrupted him. "Lady Anise says there weren't any warp gates around 300 years ago, so did you still think it was frustrating back then?" Eugene grumbled. "Hey, do you really need to ask that? We didn't even know how convenient warp gates were back then because they didn't exist 300 years ago. But now that I've become used to warp gates..." Christina interjected once more. "Lady Anise says to stop complaining and just shut up? You're actually Anise who's only impersonating Christina, aren't you?" Eugene said suspiciously. "Or perhaps you're Christina, who's only pretending to be Anise and telling me to shut up." Christina covered her mouth as she giggled. Then, with a cough to clear her throat, she started leading them away. "I've already been in touch with the priest of this parish," Christina said once her giggles had subsided. "To be honest, I don't like that we're relying on the Bishop of Alcardi in the first place," Eugene confessed. "Fortunately, the bishop has promised us her cooperation," Christina reported. Eugene asked suspiciously, "Can she be trusted?" Christina nodded. "As far as I can tell, yes, she can. She's an honest and faithful person." There was an unavoidable difference in the common sense of Eugene, Christina, and Anise. Eugene and Anise were people from 300 years ago. Anise did have the experience of having lived in the era of peace that rapidly followed the swearing of the oath. However, Eugene or Hamel had no such experience. According to Hamel's common sense, demon folks were enemies who had to be killed no matter what. Such an unwavering hatred had only been tempered slightly after he had reincarnated and lived the life of Eugene Lionheart. Though very slightly. Although he believed black wizards should definitely be killed, Eugene had come to feel that, according to the situation, it should be okay to let them live. But in the case of demon folks, Eugene honestly wasn't too sure. The Queen of the Night Demons, the Blade of Incarceration, and the Rakshasa Princess. These notorious names who had run rampant through the world 300 years ago definitely needed to be killed. But what about the other demon folks? The demon folks who had been born in a peaceful world and knew nothing about war? Should even those who had never known war nor wished for it be defined as enemies and summarily executed just because they were born as demon folks? Eugene didn't know the answer to that. Nor did he want to seriously consider the question. He just felt that, as long as there was a reason to kill someone, it was fine to kill them. Eugene wasn't a saint or a sage, so he didn't have a set moral compass on whether to kill someone. Eugene voiced his suspicions. She's not human, is she? Apart from the question of whether or not demon folks should be killed no matter what, there was another matter that caused Eugene to question his common sense. Whether or not demon folks could have faith. Could they really believe in and worship the god of light whose mission was to purify all demon folks? Eugene accepted that since the world had changed, there were bound to be differences in what passed for common sense. But let alone accepting it, he couldn't even understand this. She's half human, Christina replied with a wry smile. If two people's races were different, they usually couldn't have children. But it wasn't like offspring were never born. Very rarely, two different races could join to create a child. The least common occurrence of this was the half-elf, born between a human and an elf. Besides them, there were a few cases where children were born between demi-humans belonging to different races. Alcardi Parish was founded for the purpose of converting both the humans and demon folks of Helmuth. Eileen Flora, who served as the vicar here, was born from a union between a demon folk and a human, and so was the rarest of all mixed races, a half-human half-demon folk. This fact wasn't widely known to the public. The Bishop of Alcardi always wore a pure white robe that went up to her head and covered her face with a mask. So her parishioners didn't know what their vicar's appearance actually looked like. However, Christina, who had served as the assistant bishop of Alcardi, knew the bishop's secret. She was born with the mixed blood of a demon folk and a human. But because she had such a special bloodline, Bishop Eileen's faith was all the more sincere, earnest, and faithful. It's only natural for Sir Eugene to be suspicious of her, but Vicar Eileen is the right person for this. I have never once had cause to doubt her faith, Christina stated confidently. It seems you feel a sense of kinship with her. The more pitiful and terrible your fates were, the more you relied on faith, Anise said with a smirk. As both the vicar and a bishop, she is a prominent figure in Alcardi and holds a diplomatically important position. In particular, she helps to maintain a close relationship with the demon folk nobles of Alcardi. Christina defended her. A close relationship? Eugene repeated. Christina nodded. Yes, to the extent where they even come to observe the services officiated by the vicar. So when they didn't have even a single speck of faith, they still came to watch the church service solely out of affection. Christina continued speaking. While she said that she wouldn't be able to help us with attempting to forge our identities or smuggling us in, she would be able to provide assistance by helping us get a visa immediately, ignoring the waiting line. A visa? Eugene said as he blinked, not knowing what that word meant. Christina began to explain. Helmuth is also extremely famous as a tourist destination. To the extent where, if you're rich, you hope to see Helmuth at least once before you die. Have you heard about Helmuth's demonic world? Sir Eugene. What is that? Eugene asked hesitantly. It's a huge amusement park in Helmuth, Christina replied. They say that it's full of rides that will drive children crazy. Apart from that, Helmuth also has numerous resorts with tourist attractions, so countless people visit Helmuth every day for sightseeing. However, Helmuth strictly manages the number of humans within the empire. They restrict entry to keep the tourists from overflowing so that they can keep things under control. To think that a country ruled by the demon kings would become a famous tourist destination. Eugene suddenly realized the gap between his common sense and the present day. Christina got to the point. A visa is the proof of permission to enter that all foreigners must have. We can apply to the immigration office in Helmuth to obtain tourist visas, but, according to the message from the bishop, there are too many tourists currently visiting the empire, so we would have to wait at least a year. Eugene silently processed these facts. Christina added, a tourist visa also needs to be renewed once a month by paying a large amount of money. The citizens of the Helmuth Empire with permanent residency regularly pay their taxes in life force, but tourists are not allowed to pay in life force. While originally the demon kings already had a wastefully large amount of gold, Eugene had been wondering where the financial power needed to provide welfare for the enormous number of imperial citizens had come from. The tourism business seemed to be making them enough money to break their banks, too. However, Bishop Eileen has said that she would be able to lend a hand so that we can obtain a residency visa without any costs. She can bypass the years-long waiting line and get them to us by today, Christina informed him. Wouldn't we still be rejected at the immigration screening stage? What if they don't allow the hero and the saint to enter the country? Eugene asked. I was also worried about that fact, but Bishop Eileen has said that won't be a problem. I don't know if she did anything to persuade them personally, but... Christina's words trailed off absent-mindedly as she opened the door to a waiting carriage. The continent's greatest tourist destination? A demonic world that drives kids crazy? Resorts? Was this still the evil empire ruled by the demon kings? The world has gone insane, Eugene sighed as he shook his head. Chapter 250, Al-Kardi 2. Eugene and Christina were sitting in a drawing room within the Al-Kardi Cathedral, waiting for the vicar to arrive. Had they been waiting for 10 minutes already? Knock knock. They heard a quiet knocking sound. Christina got up and opened the door. Eugene decided to also get up from his seat for the moment. The vicar Eileen Flora entered the drawing room. As Eugene had been told, she was wearing a pure white robe, which was a robe usually worn by the priests of the light, and she also had the pure white mask covering up her face that was mentioned in her description. With a slight smile, Christina bowed her head to Eileen. It has been quite a while, Bishop Eileen, Christina said in greeting. Have you been well, Saint Christina? Eileen said in return. Having exchanged casual greetings, they sat down with Eileen facing Eugene. Eugene titled his head curiously as he stared at the pure white mask beneath her hood. Black lenses had been inserted into the eye sockets of the mask that Eileen was wearing, so not only her visage but even her eyes were covered. Aha, Eugene thought as he realized something. He had been wondering why she was so obsessed with covering herself up. As he figured out Eileen's true identity, Eugene smirked. Eileen watched silently as he went through this thought process. She then bowed and said, It is an honor to meet the master of the Holy Sword, Sir Eugene Lionheart. I am Eileen Flora, the vicar of Al-Kardi. Nice to meet you, said Eugene politely as he also returned the bow in acceptance of her greetings. Then, immediately after they were done exchanging greetings, Eugene asked, Are you a vampire? Eugene was well aware that this was a rude question, but he felt that there was a need to confirm his suspicions. Yes, Eileen admitted without any attempt to conceal her identity. Even after revealing her true nature, however, she still didn't take off her mask. Eugene also didn't feel the need to go so far as to force her to do so. She wore long robes with the hood completely covering her head, and she had a mask that covered her face and even her eyes. Eugene didn't know if half vampires had the same problem, but the sun had long been the natural enemy of all vampires. Clearly, Eileen's costume was designed to protect her body from the sunlight. Perhaps it might also be to hide her charm, Eugene guessed. Vampires sucked out blood by sticking their fangs into their prey's neck. They had thus evolved over the years to make such a hunting style more convenient and effective. While it was not quite as strong as a demon eye, being able to seduce and charm an opponent by using their eyes was one of the basic abilities of all vampires. Or perhaps it's simply just to cover up her pale complexion. Or else, it might be something like scars or a burn, Eugene silently pondered. For a half-vampire to have become a bishop, there had to be a really bleak life story behind it, but Eugene didn't really care to find out more about that. Eugene coughed. Ahem. So I heard that we need something called a visa if we want to enter Helmuth? And that we need to get them issued. Yes, that's right, Eileen confirmed. Eugene continued awkwardly. I've also heard that you'll be able to help us obtain the visas, Vicar Eileen. To be more precise, I can arrange a meeting with the head of the Al-Kardi immigration office for you, Eileen clarified. So that's how it is, Eugene nodded. The guy who's the head of the immigration office, is he a human? Eileen shook her head. He is one of the demon folk. So we need to meet with that demon folk, have some kind of conversation, and we'll be able to get our visas issued? Eugene asked warily. That's right. Eileen nodded. I am just the Bishop of Al-Kardi, so I do not possess the authority to issue visas. Her response to his question had Eugene's face twisting into a scowl. Although he hadn't quite managed to fully grasp the concept of a visa yet, He had figured that it would be something similar to an entry pass. He had also thought that they would be able to pass through the gates of Al-Kardi right away after Eileen gave them their 2 passes right here and now. But why had she arranged for them to meet with the demon folk who was working as the head of the immigration office? Did that mean she intended for them to greet each other, have a chat, then make a personal request that the demon folk issue him and Christina visas just because they needed visas? Well, if it needed to be done, then he would do it. Obviously, though, Eugene felt uncomfortable, as if something was weighing down his chest. When will they be able to issue the visas? Eugene asked. After he had finished saying these words, Eugene's expression changed. The sharp hostility that he released flickered through the air in the drawing room. He immediately attempted to get up from his seat, but Christina, who was sitting beside him, quickly grabbed onto Eugene by the sleeve. Phew, a voice came from inside a wall. A man dressed in a neat suit stuck his head through said wall. Well, the word man only fit him in a very loose sense. He didn't have the appearance of a normal human. He was a demon folk with 4 eyes, 4 arms, and a sharp blade-like tail. As expected of a lion heart. No, should that be as expected of a hero? To think that the hostility you mustered up in an instant would be so sharp, the demon folk said with a shudder as he finished phasing through the wall. Each of his 4 eyes was looking in a different direction. One was focused on Eileen, another was fixed on Eugene's face, one rested on Christina's face, and the last was aimed at Eugene's hand, which had reached into his cloak for a weapon. My apologies for the sudden intrusion. My name is Drunbos Fried. As a Viscount of Helmuth, I am in charge of the immigration office at the gates of Akart. Although he sported a bizarre appearance, the demon folk bowed his head with an amiable smile and introduced himself politely. As soon as he heard the name Drunbos Fried, Eugene began to search his memory. He brought up the past from 300 years ago and all the demon folk that he had met back then, the ones he hadn't been able to kill at least. He thus ran down the list of names of the guys that he had been planning to kill. But where was Drunbos Fried? His name wasn't on the list. Including those that Hamel had killed, was there anyone with the last name Fried? No, there weren't any. That meant this demon folk hadn't been significant enough for Hamel to have remembered his name 300 years ago. Or perhaps he wasn't even born during that era. What do you want? Eugene asked cautiously. Well, now it's all because of who you two are that I really wanted to meet personally. That said, inviting you both to visit my mansion or my workplace would cause quite the public commotion, don't you agree? So I just thought, wouldn't it be for the best if I came to meet you here in person? Drunus said as he raised his head to stare at Eileen. But I'm afraid that I may have placed the madam in some trouble. Please understand my position. While I can skip several of the procedures required when issuing visas, the final interview is ultimately something that I need to conduct face-to-face. Drunus chucked and pointed to an empty seat. If it's all right with you, may I take a seat? Druns politely requested. All right, Eugene replied with barely restrained hostility. From the moment that he had decided to return to the Devildom of Helmuth, Eugene had prepared himself to face many demon folk in the future, whether he liked it or not. He couldn't keep having to suppress his desire to run amok and kill them all, while also having to endure an uncomfortable and shitty feeling every time it happened. That meant he would just have to get used to them. After 300 years, the world had really changed so much that it felt like it had gone insane. This was a feeling that Eugene had experienced several times before now. With that thought in mind, after taking a couple of breaths, he calmed down. So about the visas, I've heard that it takes a special effort to get them issued quickly. So how much will that cost us? Eugene asked, his head tilting crookedly to the side as his tone grew sharp. His tone, however, was the only sharp thing that he used. He even pulled out the hand that was reaching inside of his cloak and clasped his fingers together. It feels like he's turned his hostility into mere irritation. Is that an ancestral, a Lionheart clan trait? Perhaps it's because they both hold such a hatred for demon folk that they were recognized by the Holy Sword. Drunus thought to himself as he felt a keen interest in Eugene. Out loud, however, his words were, I don't need any money. I just want to have a short conversation with you. Does that mean if I do give you money we don't need to talk? Eugene counteroffered. Drunus laughed. I'm afraid that I can't accept that, so it seems like we might as well just talk. This interest in Eugene wasn't a feeling unique to Drunus. As a whole, the demon folk held a great interest in Eugene. Not only had Eugene stood up to Gavid Lindman, the great Duke of Helmuth, But he was also the one who had managed the performance of having the demon king of incarceration, who almost never left his palace in Babel, go to the lands of the far north. Sir Eugene and Lady Christina, are you two seeking entry into the country in order to assassinate the demon king of incarceration? Dranos asked bluntly. This was a very direct question. Christina's lips flapped soundlessly in shock while Eugene's eyebrows twitched. Just what kind of answer was this guy expecting? After considering this question for a few moments, Eugene opened his mouth to answer, only for Dranos to chuckle and wave his hand dismissively. Ahem, there's no need to be so nervous about answering the question. No matter what your response may be, I have no interest in obstructing you, Sir Eugene. Instead, my personal hope is that you truly are here in order to assassinate the Demon King, Dranos said with a calm smile. Unable to understand what Dranos meant by those words, Eugene blinked in confusion and demanded, why? Well, isn't that what the Demon King of incarceration himself is hoping for? I hold absolute respect for the desires of the Demon King, Dranos professed as he pulled out a large seal from one of his pockets. It's also because I am certain that no matter how hard Sir Eugene and the Lady Saint may try, they will not be able to kill our Demon King. Though perhaps, your efforts may end up being recorded in history as the most exciting thing to happen to Helmuth in 300 years? That's my opinion at the very least. After a slight pause, Dranos suddenly laughed and added, please take out your IDs. While staring at Dranos with a solemn expression, Eugene pulled out his identity card from one of his pockets. Dranos continued chattering, in my opinion, it seems like you haven't come here to get started on preparing for your assassination already. So are you really here for tourism? Though now that I think of it, it might be for reconnaissance. I feel like it would be very funny if you two end up falling for Helmuth's charm during your reconnaissance and you decide to just settle down in Helmuth. Boom. The table where they had placed down their ID cards suddenly shattered. Sitting across from them, Eileen's shoulders flinched in surprise. Christina, in the meantime, didn't show any reaction. She felt the same sort of annoyance that Eugene did. But, hey, Eugene said quietly as he brushed off the fragments of table that had stuck to his ID card. If I kill you right here and now and stamp our IDs myself, do you think I'll be able to pass through Alcardi's gates? Eugene's hostility had transformed into full-on killing intent. Unsure of how to respond, Dranos just stared straight into Eugene's face. For a moment he tried to gauge the difference in level between him and Eugene. Then he rose from his seat in one decisive motion, took a few steps back and bowed his head. I have shown you great disrespect. My apologies. Eugene clicked his tongue and then snapped his fingers. At this gesture, the fragments of the shattered table gathered back together into the form of a crudely made table. Eugene placed his ID back on it and crossed his arms. The stamps were placed on the backs of their ID cards. The seal was invisible to the naked eye because it had been engraved into the magic of the ID card itself. We're all finished now. I don't know how long you two plan on staying in Helmuth, but your visas are valid for the next 5 years, Dranos informed them. They wouldn't need 5 years. Eugene took his ID and placed it back in his pocket. Also, this is the mandatory travel guidebook to Helmuth that is provided to everyone who enters the country. Since Helmuth is different from the rest of the continent in many ways, it ought to be helpful to you if you give it a read, Dranos suggested with a bow of his head as he handed over a thick booklet. Well then, please enjoy your trip. Dranos had been interested in Eugene and had wanted to find out what the man's intentions were, so he had decided to prod Eugene a little, but the reaction that he had received in return was far more intense than expected. The killing intent had been so thick that it wouldn't have been strange for his head to have been sent flying at any moment. A killing intent that could cause even a mid-class demon folk to feel like a worm about to be stepped on. If this had been an actual battle, it would have felt even stronger, Dranos thought to himself in fear. Dranos no longer had any desire to provoke Eugene. My apologies. As soon as Dranos left the room, Eileen, who had been shifting restlessly, stood up and repeatedly bowed her head. I had no idea that Viscount Dranos would behave so rudely, Eileen confessed. It's fine. It's not like this is the first or even second time that people have tried to aggravate me on their first meeting with me. But he's not even a person, is he? He's a demon folk, Eugene said with a dismissive shrug as he opened up the travel booklet. The very first page of the book contained a picture of Babel, the Demon King's castle. Eugene thought to himself, to think that this thin and tall building is Babel, the demon king of Incarceration's castle. Although he had heard about this while digging for information on Helmuth, Eugene was still just as dumbfounded no matter how many times he saw it. The demon king of Incarceration's castle that Hamel had died in 300 years ago still had the appearance befitting of its name as a castle, but the current Babel was just a high-rise. In all of the continent, Helmuth was the only country who made use of the building style known as a high-rise. The culture there was so different that you couldn't even think of them as being from the same era. The demon kings and demon folk of Helmuth had single-handedly revolutionized magical engineering over the past 300 years. And the capital city of Pandemonium was built with state-of-the-art infrastructure that the rest of the continent had no hope of catching up to. What made this possible was the existence of Babel, which stood tall as the center of Pandemonium, and the being known as the Demon King who watched over the entire city from the top of the high-rise. The Demon King of Incarceration wasn't just an idle presence either. His very existence supplied unlimited demonic power to the entire city. And Babel processed the Demon King's demonic power to use it as the energy that powered the entire city. In other words, it was by the grace of His Majesty, the Great Demon King, that the capital city of Pandemonium had become the most developed city with the highest living standards not just in Helmuth, but also throughout the entire continent. Or at least that was what was written in the guidebook. The only city that they've developed to such a unique extent is Pandemonium. I've heard that most of the other high-ranking demon folk also live in the capital, Eugene recalled. Although the guidebook hadn't gone so far as to record the names of these aristocrats, Eugene had already investigated them in advance. Duke Gavid Lindman hadn't accepted a separate fief for himself and just lived in Babel. Besides him, among the demon folk that Eugene still remembered, there were quite a few living leisurely lives in Pandemonium. Though there are also a lot of guys who have lost their lives after trying to climb in rank, Eugene noted. 300 years had passed and the world had changed a lot. However, the reason why Eugene could still feel that the nature of demon folk at the very least hadn't changed that much was because there was still the existence of a ranking system amongst them. The ranks amongst demon folk were decided by title or reputation. A lower order could challenge a higher order, and the higher order was unable to refuse the challenge. Thus, a battle would commence. Usually the loser was killed. Regardless of the difference in ranks between them, the winner took everything that the loser had. The bigger the return, the bigger the risk, of course, so challenges to the ranking didn't take place all that regularly. As for the humans in Helmuth, those among them who had sworn an oath to serve as post-mortem laborers were able to live luxurious lives because the contract they had signed placed a high-ranking demon as their sponsor. Naturally, the ranking of humans was decided by which demon folk they had behind them. Because rank was so important to the demon folk, this information was also written in the travel guide. There is also a demon folk matching service provided for all travelers. Are you concerned about getting into a sudden conflict during your trip or getting caught in a fight between delinquents? Have no fear. If you visit the Helmuth Tourist Center that is located in every city and request the use of our matching service, we can arrange for a brief contract with a demon folk of at least intermediate level. The above contract is guaranteed to be a contract that only charges the standard amount that is agreed upon, and the soul of the contractor is never taken as collateral. However, you may encounter situations where the rank of the demon folk matched with you is not high enough. If any unavoidable situation arises, please present your ID card before any violence takes place or reveal the name of the demon folk who you are matched with. These must be the end times, Eugene muttered. He shook his head and turned to the next page. Giabella Celebrity Entertainment, the Giabella Construction Company, the Giabella Fashion Group, etc. Led by Duke Noir Giabella, an invincible and beautiful businesswoman who has found success in all of the businesses that she has put her name on for the past 300 years. It would not be an exaggeration to say that she leads all of Helmuth's latest trends. Duke Noir. Eugene's face crumpled into a scowl. Boasting 3 times the scale of Demonic World, transcending all theme parks to become a theme city, Giabella City will finally open doors next month. Seeing how so many advertisements had been added into it, Noir Giabella's influence perspired from every word of this guidebook. The Demon King's Tour for Tourists. You can go back through the history of Helmuth and experience the era from 300 years ago. Starting with the Demon King of Carnage's castle, we will also tour the ruins of the castles formerly belonging to the Demon King of Cruelty and the Demon King of Fury. Ha, Eugene sighed. The Demon King's tour. Its very name caused Eugene to feel extremely disturbed. The world really has gone insane, Eugene said as he shook his head and closed the guidebook. Chapter 251. Al-Karti 3. Although Arath was also in the middle of actively developing its own brand of magic cars, the ones already racing at the forefront of this field were Helmuth's dark power cars. These mechanical contraptions were a product of the magic engineering that Helmuth was so proud of, and they were also fueled by the dark power of the Demon King of Incarceration. Babel, the 99-story building that stood tall at the center of Pandemonium, served as a transmission tower, relaying the infinite dark power of the Demon King of Incarceration to the various sectors of Helmuth. The Black Towers, which served as landmarks in the sectors of Helmuth, received and amplified the dark power sent to them by Babel, and relayed it throughout the entire city via magic cables buried underground. The dark power roads that were built like this, as the name suggested, had dark power flowing through them. The reason why Helmuth had been able to surpass all other countries on the continent in successfully commercializing automobiles was because the need for a magic engine to run their automobiles had been replaced by these dark power roads. Thanks to that, the dark power cars didn't need any fuel, and even humans without any knowledge of magic or mana were able to drive them. An essential course of tourism in Helmuth, the flower of all vacation trips. To all the tourists who have come to take part in the Demon King tour, I bid you welcome. The wealthy and relaxed-appearing tourists who alighted from a huge tour bus were greeted by this grandiose welcome. The neatly dressed demon folk guide who had gotten off before them wasn't using anything like a microphone, but his magically amplified voice was still able to clearly reach the ears of all these tourists. The place where we have now arrived is the castle of the Demon King of Carnage. Among the 5 demon kings who lived 300 years ago, the Demon King of Carnage was particularly tyrannical and ruthless. As his name suggests, this Demon King particularly enjoyed carnage. The guide paused to raise his finger and point to the hideous Demon King's castle behind him. 300 years ago, the heroes of the continent, led by the Great Vermouth, infiltrated the castle. While the knights from the continent faced the Demon King's army, Vermouth and the other heroes climbed up to the top floor of the castle and battled the Demon King of Carnage. Their battle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. Even now, Eugene could still vividly recall the memories from back then. That was the first Demon King they fought and the first they defeated, but it wasn't just the Demon King of Carnage who came close to death. An existence on the level of a Demon King wouldn't die even if you killed them over and over again. They had cut off the head of the Demon King of Carnage dozens of times over those 3 days, but he still refused to die and kept on getting back up, driving Vermouth and his companions close to death. If it wasn't for Anissa's holy magic, let alone 3 days, they wouldn't have even lasted a day. Although his body carried none of the scars from back then, when Eugene looked up at the Demon King's castle, his perfectly healthy left shoulder started to ache. This was due to an injury that had been inflicted on him by the Annihilation Hammer Jigalath. If Hamel had been hit directly by the blow, half of his body would have disintegrated, but in a desperation-powered move, Hamel had barely managed to deflect the blow. However, just from that slight brush, a scar that could never be erased had been left on his body. All of you may already know this, but 300 years ago, the Demon King of Carnage's castle completely collapsed into a ruin. However, our Demon King of Incarceration said that there is no future for the demon folk if they forget their past, so he rebuilt the 3 Demon King castles that had been turned into ruins. The tour guide paused. 300 years ago, the demon folk were the one to start the war. Everyone, whether it's as a race or as individuals, we demon folk have committed enough crimes that it will take us hundreds or even thousands of years to redeem ourselves. This reconstructed Demon King's castle is a symbol of the unjust war that was started by our race, and it serves to remind us of our long legacy of sin. As the guide's speech continued in that vein, Eugene lost any desire to continue listening. While fiercely grinding his teeth, he lowered the sunglasses that had been resting on top of his head. How dare they advertise it as a tourist attraction if they claim to have rebuilt it in order to never forget their sins? Eugene growled in complaint. Why are you making such a fuss? Don't the people on the continent do something similar? When I heard about the entrance fee they were charging for Sienna's mansion, I felt disgusted by my fellow humans. And I've always hated Ura's hypocrisy even before they dared to create an icon of my image. Anise said with a derisive snort as she got down from the driver's seat of their CAR.in Helmuth. where carriages had been completely abandoned. Even tourists were able to purchase dark power cars if they had money and a license. Surprisingly, Christina, who had served as the assistant bishop of the Alcardi parish, which was adjacent to Helmuth, actually had a driver's license for a dark power car. So they had gone ahead and bought one, a massive off-road dark power car. Warp gates were used for long-distance travel, while the dark power car was used within the cities. Anise really liked this mode of transportation, which was completely different from riding a horse, and during their trip she had started alternating driving duties with Christina, until they finally arrived at the parking lot of the Demon King of Carnage's castle. Eugene grumbled, "Seeing this terrible Demon King's castle restored to perfect condition gives me a stomach ache." The Demon King castles were rebuilt about 100 years ago. At that time it was said that there was intense resistance to the restoration of the Demon King's castles from various parts of the continent, but the Demon King of Incarceration stepped forward personally and persuaded the continent. He claimed that they weren't doing it to glorify the war from 300 years ago, but instead to prevent themselves from forgetting the sins that they committed back then, Christina explained, having exchanged places with Anise once more. With a wry smile, Christina took off her own sunglasses. Currently, Christina was dressed in a fashion that made it difficult to imagine that she was even a priest, much less the saintess herself. The same went for Eugene. The cloak of darkness, which originally had thick fur, would have stood out no matter where they went on the continent. In Helmuth, where the culture was so different from the continent that it felt like a whole other world, it would have been even more noticeable. Thus, the cloak of darkness currently looked like an ordinary large coat. Eugene's gray hair, which could even serve as a form of identification for the Lionhearts, had also been dyed black. This was because, while they were not able to use fake IDs, he still didn't want to advertise the fact that he was indeed Eugene Lionheart. The Demon King's castle and its nearby facilities are all classified as tourist attractions, but the Khazard Hills aren't included within those tourist attractions, Eugene reminded Christina, having done his research and investigation in advance. 300 years ago, this whole plain collapsed in the aftermath of their battle with the Demon King of Carnage. It was also then that they found the ruins where the Moonlight Sword had been sealed. Although they turned the ruins upside down, apart from the single Moonlight Sword, nothing else, ancient artifacts or otherwise, was found. They weren't able to find out the origins of the Moonlight Sword or of the ruins either. At that time they just left the ruins as they were, but, in the current era, no ancient ruins remained at the Khazard Hills. It must have been vermouth, Eugene guessed. The fragment of the Moonlight Sword that Eugene had obtained from Aratha's auction house was said to have been found at the Khazard Hills. In the process of shattering the Moonlight Sword, vermouth had probably also destroyed the ruins and buried some of the shattered fragments underground during the process. As expected, are you really planning to sneak in? Christina asked with a stiff expression. That's the cleanest way to handle things, Eugene argued. The Khazard Hills weren't included in the list of tourist attractions, but they also weren't just left open for anyone to easily enter. From decades back, the Khazard Hills had been made the private property of a tribe of demon folk. Those demon folk had carried out major construction work on the entire hillside and developed it into a huge mine. The master of the Khazard mine was Rode Lonick, a demon folk who had served under the Demon King of Carnage 300 years before. Eugene also had a vague recollection of him. He was one of the demons. And they had met on the battlefield several times. At those times Eugene's Hamel skills couldn't be described as having been in their prime. Especially since it was before he had fully familiarized himself with fighting the demon folk, who didn't die easily even when dealt an otherwise killing blow. Eugene had still thought that as long as he cut off their limbs, stabbed them through the heart and cut their throat, they would definitely die. Of course, most demon folk would die once all that was done to them. However, Rode was a demon folk who had just barely crawled beyond the standards set by the majority of demon folk, so he hadn't died from all of that. But that was all he ever managed to achieve. He was as durable as a cockroach, but he only posed about the same level of a threat. Rode took part in their battle against the Demon King of Carnage 300 years ago, but he couldn't even follow them up to the top floor of the castle, and after lurking around the battle going on below, he ran away as soon as Carnage was killed. It really has been a long time, Eugene thought nostalgically. To think that guy is now a businessman in name at least. The Khazard mine was still called a mine, but no mining was actually taking place there. At the very least, in recent years, The Khazard mine had failed to produce any ores. Even so, there were still plenty of demon folk going in and out of the Khazard mine, and it was an open secret of how this supposed mine was really being used. Helmuth really was a two-faced place, or at least that was what Eugene thought. It was considered the most developed country on the continent, a human-friendly empire that promised so many welfare benefits to humans that it was hard to believe that it was a land of demon folk. Such standards of welfare were also applied to the demon folk. The demon folk and humans of Helmuth lived a far more stable life than the inhabitants of any other country on the continent. However, at the same time, Helmuth still hadn't completely broken out of the mold of the Devildom that it had been just 300 years before. Just like how a beast was still a beast even after it pulled out its own fangs and claws, in the end, a demon folk was still a demon folk in nature. In Helmuth, the original demon folk culture was still on open display. But are humans really any different? Eugene thought with a click of his tongue. Deep within the mine was hidden an arena where low-level demon folk participated in fights. The demon folk who fought there sought to increase their own strength by killing their opponents. Life force was used as a prize for these fights. If any of the fighters managed to stand out, they could even end up being recruited by Rode, who portrayed himself as an old hand in the business world. If not, they could at least earn a recommendation from Rode and become a member of a different demon tribe. 4 Gutterrat members of a low-class demon folk tribe with no future ahead of them, it could be quite worthwhile to lurk around the arena. Of course, such an arena wouldn't be open every day, and today was one of the days that the arena was closed. Eugene had no desire of doing the tiresome thing of trying to sneak into the arena along with the crowds, so he planned on infiltrating the mine tonight. Even if you try to persuade me, I have no intention of changing my mind, Eugene insisted. Since we've managed to enter Helmuth, there's no reason for me not to do it. There was a possibility that fragments of the Moonlight Sword were still there. If he managed to find even one more fragment and added it to the rest of the Moonlight Sword, well, it still wouldn't be as strong as it had been in the past. Yet even so, the power of the Moonlight Sword was too attractive to just give up. Christina began worriedly, "If you get caught..." Eugene interrupted her. "If I get caught, I just need to run away." Eugene didn't have any great concerns regarding that possibility. No matter how the situation might turn out, he had the confidence that he would be able to escape. And in the unlikely event that he couldn't escape, Eugene brought up the faint memories that he still had of Rodlonic and went over them again. All of the demon folk who had lived during that era of war had definitely grown stronger over these past 300 years. Eugene had gone through enough encounters to realize that these 300 years were far from a short period of time. After all, he had received a one-sided beating from Molin. Then there were Gavid Lindman and Morgiabella. Those 2 monsters who had been close to the Demon King level in the first place had gotten even stronger over the years. Even someone like Iris was stronger than she had been 300 years before. Eugene was silent as he pondered the risk. Yet when he considered the risks soberly, Eugene realized that, the way he was now, he was fully capable of putting up a fight against Iris. In comparison, when they met just a year ago, there was still such a difference between them that it wouldn't have even counted as a fight. However, Eugene's white flame formula had risen all the way up to the 6th star, and he had even developed his own signature. In his current condition, as long as he was prepared and gave it his best shot, Eugene felt that it wouldn't be impossible for him to even kill Iris. Of course, there was no way to tell that without trying it, but this meant that they were now close enough that Eugene could make an estimate of his chances of victory. As for Rodlonic, the Rode whose head Hamel had been able to send flying 300 years before, when Hamel wasn't even in his prime and still unfamiliar with fighting demon folk. How strong could that shitty bastard have become even after staying alive for 300 years? Eugene scoffed silently. After considering how Rode compared with Iris, Eugene couldn't help but feel dismissive. He smirked at Christina, who still had a worried expression on her face. "Don't make that face. It won't be dangerous and it won't even take that long," Eugene assured her. Christina hesitated. "However, don't worry about me and just wait for me here at the inn," Eugene instructed. The Bishop of Al-Karti, Eileen, was indeed somehow immune to it, but ordinary demon folk were allergic to divine power. As such, back 300 years back, any missions involving infiltration and reconnaissance were left exclusively to Hamel and Sienna, with Anise being left behind. The same was true this time as well. While Christina accepted their circumstances, It was instead Anise who expressed her displeasure. In my past life it was at times like these that I really hated Sienna, Anise confessed. Huh? Christina responded in confusion. Anise explained, Molen was an idiot, so infiltration and reconnaissance were impossible for him, and Sir Vermouth needed to stay with the main group in case of an emergency. As someone who isn't much different from a civilian, if I'm not able to use divine power, I was, of course, excluded from taking such missions. Not much different from a civilian. Christina wasn't sure about everything else Anise had said, but she was having difficulty accepting that claim in particular. That's why Sienna and Hamel were always the ones who went out on patrol, Anise continued. Whenever that happened, that bitch Sienna always seemed so happy that she could die, but she would forcefully keep her cheeks from moving and hold her lips together so that they couldn't twitch in order to act like it was nothing to her. Her blatantly pleased expression seemed intended to piss me off. You don't know how many times I had to hold back the urge to give her a few good slaps. Eugene had already decided to try and infiltrate the Khazard mine after dark, and he had also done his reconnaissance. Even so, they still had quite a lot of time left, so he decided to remind himself of the old days. That was why they had come here, to the Demon King of Carnage's castle. It was forbidden to ride a dark power car within the castle walls. As such, all dark power vehicles had to be parked in the parking lot outside of the castle walls. So this is the Demon King of Carnage's castle, where their legend first began, Mare said slowly, her mouth hanging open as she looked up at the castle. The group of tourists led by their tour guide had already entered through the gates of the castle ahead of them, but Eugene and his companions weren't members of the tour group in the first place. Eugene and Anise were living witnesses of what had happened here 300 years ago, so why would they even need a guide? This really reminds me of the old days, Eugene said as he patted Mare on the head and approached the castle gates. Although he had been indignant that this castle was being advertised as a tourist attraction, it seemed like there wasn't any entrance fee needed to enter the Demon King of Carnage's castle. In that aspect, they're actually better than Yura's or Aroth, Eugene muttered with a smirk as he led them forward. The first thing they saw after passing through the castle's walls was a memorial stone that was as tall and sturdy as the castle itself. This memorial stone records the names of the heroes who lost their lives here during their challenge to bring peace to the world 300 years ago. While we can't guarantee that the names of every hero who perished here has been recorded, the Demon King of Incarceration swears to honor all those who gave their lives for peace. The guide who had entered ahead of them was giving an explanation for the memorial stone in front of the tourist group. Christina turned her head, concerned that Eugene might just go crazy after hearing such words, but Eugene's expression was as calm as ever. What a load of bullshit, Eugene spat out a curse with that same calm expression. In this Demon King of Carnage's castle that the Demon King of Incarceration had personally rebuilt, Eugene recalled the last time that he had left this place, 300 years before. The day after they had killed the Demon King. Everyone had worked together to destroy the castle. Molen had blasted apart the walls with a swing of his giant hammer, while Hamel had focused on tearing down the castle towers. Sienna had also let loose with her spells, and even Vermouth had fired off his thunderbolt Pernoa and the dragon spear with a hearty laughter. It wasn't just them either. Everyone who had fought and survived in the taking of this Demon King's castle had participated in the destruction of the castle. All of the bodies of their comrades whose names had been placed on this memorial stone had been carried outside beforehand. While everyone else united together to demolish the castle, Anise and the other priests were reciting prayers to honor the souls of those who had passed away. I thought that I would never see this castle again, Anise muttered inside Christina's head. I'm only saying this now, Christina, and I've always kept this a secret from Hamel, but I really thought that all of us would die here in this castle. At these words, Christina unconsciously halted her steps. Fortunately, they had already entered the castle and were now waiting for the elevator that led up to the roof. Right now, this place might have elevators installed for the sake of convenience, but 300 years ago there wasn't anything like that in here. At that time we felt like we were facing our certain deaths. We were a suicide squad with the sole mission of killing the Demon King. In order to send the 5 of us up, more than 100 times our number were fighting to buy us time outside of the castle. Christina listened silently. However, that didn't mean that the Demon King of Carnage's castle was left completely empty. High-rank demon folk serving as royal guards were stationed within the castle. But even that meant that we had successfully accomplished the preliminary part of our plan, and that we had made enough preparations. Since his army had been led outside, we only had to defeat a small number of high-rank demon folk before facing the Demon King of Carnage. The elevator arrived on the first floor. Our battle against the high-ranking demon folk wasn't all that difficult. At that time we were still inexperienced, but even so, the enemy was well within our capabilities to face. Since the Demon King of Carnage was ranked 5th among demon kings, that meant his followers were also weaker than those who served the higher-ranking demon kings. "Sister," Christina quietly called out. "That's right. It was just for a short moment, but we really were being overly arrogant. That was why the shock that followed so easily sent us into despair." As the 5th-ranked demon king, the Demon King of Carnage was indeed the weakest of the 5 demon kings. However, upon meeting such an existence for the first time, the entity known as a demon king made me fear for my life from the very moment that I first encountered him, Anise confessed. Christina hesitated. "However, sister, you and the others, no, all of you heroes from 300 years ago, didn't you eventually succeed in killing the Demon King of Carnage?" "Yes. In the end we did succeed in killing him. After fighting for 3 whole days and nights and going through countless life and death crises, that is." The elevator climbed upward. Inside of the spacious elevator, there were many other tourists besides Eugene, Christina, and Mare. They were all humans. With excited expressions, they chatted about the Demon King Castle's scenery as well as the legends of this place. "I'm having a lot of mixed feelings," Anise whispered. "We killed the Demon King and destroyed his castle. Now 300 years have passed and the fragile peace that we managed to achieve still continues undisturbed. In that era, blood and corpses piled up like small hills in the Demon King's castle. But now what was destroyed back then has been rebuilt and has become a tourist destination. I died, leaving behind just my soul, and Hamel has been reincarnated. But we're now back here. Is all this situation causing you distress?" Christina asked cautiously. "I think it's only natural for me to feel displeased. The very existence of this place is offensive to both Hamel and myself. After all, doesn't it seem like the battle site where we all fought so desperately is being treated inappropriately? However, apart from that, there are many other emotions. I'm also feeling proud. Because we fought here, and we won. It's because of that that we can be here now." At these words, Christina unconsciously burst into laughter. She nodded her head in agreement as she clutched the rosary that was hidden inside her jacket. The elevator soon arrived on the top floor and the doors opened to reveal a rooftop that was spacious and fully open to the sky. Mare unconsciously let out an awed exclamation at the sight that lay in front of her. "Whoa!" This was the landmark of the Demon King of Carnage's castle. The Death List. 300 years ago, everyone worked together to destroy the Demon King's castle. However, one of the walls was left standing. This was because everyone was instantly convinced by the idea shouted by one of the knights who had fought at the castle, that something should be left behind so that no one would forget this day. "Let's write down our names." Molin was the one who proposed this idea. At first, his intention was to write down all of their names, but the commander of the Allied forces at the time shook his head. The commander insisted that only the names of the 5 people who had managed to kill the Demon King should be written down, because the fewer names there were, the easier it would be for those names to serve as role models. Vermouth, who wasn't very eager to play along with this idea, was still the very first to get pushed forward. In the end, with a bothered yet helpless expression on his face, Vermouth wrote his name on the wall. Vermouth Lionheart, Hamel Dinez, Fianna Meridian, Anise Slywood, Molin Roar. Their 5 names were written on the wall. Then in red, the names of the Demon Kings were also written down. The Demon King of Destruction, the Demon King of Incarceration, the Demon King of Fury, the Demon King of Cruelty, the Demon King of Carnage. Next to the name of the Demon King of Carnage, which was written down at the very bottom, a cross was drawn. The list was thus engraved into the only bit left standing of the castle, and everyone chuckled as they looked at it. Thinking back on it now, it was childish of them to have done something like that, but at that time, everyone had been full of laughter. Wasn't it only natural? That was the first time a Demon King had been defeated. This was the first time that the humans who had been one-sidedly trampled by the Demon Kings and their armies had managed to kill a Demon King. At that moment, everyone held hope for the future. hope that one day they would be able to defeat all of the demon kings. Eugene didn't get close to the death list. Just why had they moved it up to the rooftop from its original resting place down below? With a wry smile, Eugene turned to look around at the top of the castle walls. It wasn't hard to find what he was looking for. It seemed that Anise had also felt the same urge. Christina was currently looking in the same direction as Eugene. Following the battle that had lasted 3 days and 3 nights, when Vermouth's holy sword finally pierced through the Demon King's heart. At that time Hamel had been standing right next to Vermouth. Hamel was piercing the Demon King's throat with the spear that he was holding in both hands. Molen was blocking the Demon King's annihilation hammer that was attempting to crush Vermouth with his bare hands. Sienna was holding the Demon King immobile with her magic, and Anise was utilizing her divine power to keep the Demon King from regenerating, while also keeping everyone alive. This scene had repeated itself dozens of times over the past 3 days and nights. Finally, at dawn, when the sun had just begun to rise, they succeeded in killing the Demon King of Carnage. Eugene could clearly remember what Vermouth had looked like at that moment, when he had pulled out the holy sword that he had stuck through the chest of the Demon King of Carnage. At that time Vermouth's light was as bright as the dawn itself. Everyone was excited about defeating the Demon King, but Vermouth's appearance with his back to the light had appeared sacred enough to suppress everyone's sense of excitement. It was rare to see Vermouth laugh. However, at that moment he was smiling so brightly that it was hard to believe that this was still the usual Vermouth. "Thank you for accompanying me here, and for not dying. Thank you." Eugene and Anise were both looking at the place where Vermouth had been standing back then. The sun was floating high in the sky. Today it didn't seem particularly dazzling. However, the two of them felt like they were now looking at the dawn that they had seen back then. "On that day, this is where the legend began," said the guide who was standing in front of the death list. At these words, Eugene laughed unconsciously. Although he felt that the word legend was too grand of a description, it was true that on that day something truly had begun here. A promise to kill all the demon kings. The resolve to save the world. A hope that they would be able to achieve the seemingly impossible. It all started here 300 years ago.